Phones for our speakers. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So first things first, everybody. We have our upcoming Shrimp Fest, May 1st through the 3rd, and we are still looking for volunteers. If you are interested and you know somebody who's interested, please contact Theo. Her information will be in the back over there.
Ladies and gentlemen, before you can leave the building, you have to sign up. I'm right back there. Please, we are desperately in need of volunteers. Look at that, I don't even have one.
Okay. Elaborate.
You feel bad for me.
Elaborate.
Got you right there.
I'll elaborate once I get your name.
All right, everybody. So, also, grab your lunches for our May 6th brown bag. We will have our very own docent, Chip Kirkpatrick. He is a metal detector and author of Roscoe, My Cardinal Sin, which is downstairs. He will be giving a talk about some of the local finds that he's found on some historical artifacts. Also, after this event, right after, we will have our exhibit opening of Transfer Challenges and Transformations, an exhibit that, my first exhibit, so I'd appreciate it if you guys could stay for that. Right after. All right, so without further ado, I will pass it on to author of Thank You for the Shoes, senior executive of businesses, and award winner of multiple communications awards, Maria Rizzo.
Thank you, Tariq. Tariq's been a pleasure to work with, and I learned today that his grandmother is from Sicily. So, we're cousins in a way. So, this is called a brief overview of the history of Italian immigration to America. And the reason it's brief is because there is so much in the history of Italians in America. It's a very rich tapestry. And if I went to it all, you'd be here till tomorrow morning. So
we have nothing to do.
Oh, well, so here's the deal. I was told I had to fill an hour, but I don't think that you all should be sitting for an hour, nor that I should be talking for an hour. So I want to make this as interactive as possible, and I'm trying to get this only to 40 minutes, and then you'll be able to look at my book, and I'll be able to visit with each of you. So first of all, show of hands, how many in the audience have some ancestry that ties back to Italy? Good many of us, right? So what we're going to cover during this brief time together are the following. The first crossings to the New World, the Italian influence on the New Republic, the Italian reunification in 1871 and its aftermath, the flood of Italian immigration to the USA, where they went and why, and then I'll tie that all into Thank You for the Shoes, just tiny bit about what the book's about, and answer any of your questions. But I'm happy to have you raise your hand and interject at any time. Let's make this fun and not boring. Allora, andiamo. Early crossings. There was a man, an explorer, who was from Venetian extraction, Giovanni Caputo. And Giovanni Caputo crossed in 1487, and the English called him John Cabot. He landed in what was most likely Newfoundland, right, yes. And he claimed all of the lands of North America for England. In English, when he got there, he unfurled both the English and the Venetian flag. Most of these explorers their heart was in their home country, but most of wherever they were from the Italian peninsula, had no money to outfit them. So they went to where, their adventuring and exploring could be funded by others. We all know, well-known, Cristoforo Colombo. He sailed under the Spanish flag for Ferdinand and Isabella. And later it was published in his letters when he When he thought had arrived in Asia, he left the continent of Europe in 1492 and arrived on October 12th. Really not a long 2 months journey. So when he landed in what is now the Bahamas, he called the island San Salvador. For nearly 5 months, Columbus explored the Caribbean, particularly the islands of Cuba, Hispaniola, Santo Domingo, and Puerto Rico. And before returning to Spain, he left 39 men there, and he kidnapped, I'm sorry to say, some of the natives to bring them back so they could be seen by the Europeans. But only a few of them survived the voyage, 8 of them. Columbus also brought back small amounts of gold, some birds, some plants. He wanted to show the richness of the continent that he thought was Asia. When he got back to Spain, he immediately wrote a letter to Ferdinand and Isabella, documenting what he had seen and what he had done. But as you can see from the map, he made several voyages, pretty much the same area, and a different place each time. Now, Columbus has been trashed a lot, and not because he's of similar origins as mine, but one of the things that was documented in some letters that he wrote was that he complimented how beautiful, not only handsome bodily, but how gentle the natives that he found were. So he thought they needed to be protected because they were so without guile, as how he described them. So he came in 1492, then in 1499, and 1504. Another explorer was from the Republic of Florence, Giovanni da Verrazzano. In 1506, he left the port, after settling in France, he left the port Dieppe from the Kingdom of France, and he began his career as a navigator, which was what his heart was really about. And so he was one of the first renowned to sail along the Atlantic coast of North America. Wait a minute, something's out of order here.
Well, you got Versailles, but before that was Vespucci.
Oh, we just slipped over him. I'm sorry. We have to talk about him. Very much so. This man was very interesting because, you know, he was, he thought too that he had reached Asia, and he sailed for the King of Portugal. But everything about what he did was very confusing. The letters, the description of his trips. So he was very confounding. No matter how many times people reread and tried to track what he did, they weren't certain about him. But the interesting thing is that he realized that he had not arrived in Asia. He realized that he had found a new continent. And so in his letter, he was not a wealthy man, where all these others really came from families with money. Amerigo Vespucci was not from a wealthy family, but he was very well connected. He was a schoolboy friend of Lorenzo de' Medici. That's a name I'm sure you all know. So anyway, and he made several trips to this land, but in 1504 and 1503. But what happened that was interesting is he kept referring to his discovery as the New World. He never referred to it any differently. And then there was a friend of his who was a German map maker by the name of I hope I can say this, Waldesir Müller. And Waldesir Müller published a book on geography. And in this book, he decided that, you know, and Vespucci had mostly gone to the southern half of the New World, as America. And he said we should honor this man who made this trip. And he started referring to it as America because his name was the masculine form, and the countries of Europe and others were the feminine form. So he put the A at the end of America to represent the feminine continent. And so at the end of the day, it became perpetuated that this North and South continent would be called America. Now there's a lot of belief that Vespucci never knew that his friend had done that, but who knows. Now we're going to go on to Giovanni di Verrazzano. And he sailed for the King of France in 1524. He's renowned as the first European to ever sail the Atlantic coast of North America, between Florida and New Brunswick. So he also went to New York Bay and Narragansett Bay, which so many in this room probably have ties to New York in one way or another. It was very interesting because his trips really influenced the cartographers of the day. So despite his discoveries, Verrazzano's reputation did not proliferate as much as so many other explorers. And the reason was that he gave the European name Francesca because he sailed from France. And of course claimed it all for the King of France. Everybody who arrived always claimed it for the king and queen of whoever they were sailing for. I mean, if you funded my ships, I'm going to name the new land after you. So Francesca didn't stick, but it's even worse than that. According to his contemporaries, there were so many other things going on that he almost was forgotten in history. Because shortly after the years that the dramatic conquest of the Aztec Empire happened, and the first circumnavigation of the world occurred. Magellan, remember him?
Ferdinando?
Yeah, he was not Italian. I couldn't find any ties to Italy. I tried. Believe me, I tried. Anyway, so he was kind of overshadowed by those big things in the world, and people sort of forgot about him. It took a long time for Verrazzano to get any credit for what he did, long after he passed away. Now, how many of you are from New York, the New York area? So we have a bridge called the Verrazzano Narrows Bridge.
The Verrazzano Bridge.
Yeah, but
And the
that's...
Verrazzano Bridge ain't that bad.
Yeah,
After you?
After Verrazzano.
yeah, but it took a long while. They did that when after a lot of societies sprang up. Italian Americans, you'll see going forward, suffered a great deal in the country. And slowly some of these societies to preserve and protect their name, their heritage, sprang up. And Verrazzano got his due because of some of the Italian American societies that sprung up. How many of you know this name, Pietro Cesare Alberti? Have you ever heard of him before? No. Well, he was the first Italian settler in America, in the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam. And New Amsterdam was the forerunner to New York, right? So he was a Venetian immigrant, and he was considered the first settler. And he was born on the island of Malmolco in 1608 at the height of Venice's commercial power. Several things happened. He was a member of a very powerful family, Alberti family, and he was the son of the secretary of the ducal treasury. So the family itself was a branch of the well-known family, Florentine family, the Medicis. It all ties back to the Medicis. So Pietro would never have come to America. He had no need to come. He was well-to-do. He was not an explorer. But what happened was very interesting. How many of you have ever heard of the 30 Years' War? The 30 Years' War was it was primarily fought in Central Europe, and it was one of the longest and most destructive wars around. And there were 8 million deaths from military engagements, famine, and plague. And troops from the Netherlands were stationed in Malmolco, And these troops carried with them a particularly virulent strain of bubonic plague. They essentially decimated the people there. So there were 46,000 deaths of the 140,000 residents. And what it did is it declined the Venice population by so much that their height of their trade was gone. So this family was not going to be able to sustain all these children. So he decided he was going to go to the New World. So when he was 26 years old, he decides to set sail as a merchant, a worker on a merchant marine ship. And it took almost a year to come because the ship went from Venice, it went down, it went up and around. It was the longest convoluted trip you've ever seen. It was not a direct anything, but anyway, he finally got there in 1646, and he moved to New York, and a year later he married a woman, and they had 7 children. Her name was Judith Mangi, but the Americans spelled it McGee. But anyway, she was Italian, and they had a home on Broad Street, where the financial district is now in New York. And the interesting thing was that, he was not a farmer, but they decided they were going to buy 100 acres of farmland. So they had 100 acres, and they had 7 children, and then they farmed those 100 acres. And then in 1655, they were killed in an Indian raid on Long Island. And so if you know of anybody with the name Albertus, Albert, you can trace him back to him.
There's local names in Nassau County with those.
Yes, and I'm sure if they've done their DNA, they'll find that they're related to this thing.
We should have told me this 20 years ago.
There is a marker that was set up for him not too far from where they lived. So the Italians not only explored, but they also helped settle the New World. Enrico di Tonti, how many of you ever heard that name? Okay. Together with, you all have heard of the French explorer La Salle. Well, they explored the Great Lakes region. Di Tonti helped to found the first European settlement in Illinois in 1679. Shortly after that, in 1683, he worked some magic to buy some land for some Italian immigrants in Arkansas. And they named it Tonti Town. They built all the houses in this place, they built a school, but the locals were very weary of these Italians. They were dark-skinned, they spoke a different language, they were Catholic. They had every reason to be wary of them. So they went and they burned the school down. And so when the school was on fire, a bunch of them ran to put the fire out, and then these people started circling around them, and then Tonti said to them, he said, we grow all these vegetables. We need some help from you to show us how we can market them. We know how to grow them. We know how to grow grapes. We know how to grow cherries. We know how to grow fruit. But our corn doesn't grow very well. Will you teach us how? And suddenly the dam was broken. They became helping one another. And this Tonti town became a very prosperous place. And they still call him the father of Arkansas. And in Tonti town, they still have a wine festival every fall in honor of him, Enrico di Tonti. The Americans dropped the D, and Tonti was spelled with a Y often, so that's okay. This same man also served as the governor of the Louisiana Territory for the next 20 years. And his brother, Alphonse de Tonti, with the French explorer Antoine de la Cadillac was the co-founder of Detroit. So sometimes people say to me, you know there's a lot of Italians in Detroit? Yes, I know. So, and then he was the acting colonial governor for 12 years there. The Southwest and California were explored and mapped by an Italian Jesuit priest, Esbio Kino, in the late 17th and 18th centuries. And it was so interesting because all of these people got their names changed and no one, you don't make the association. You know, we tend to think of Italians with an O, an E, or an I at the end, but the names got changed. I'm looking for my slide changer, the birth of a new nation. Although a comparatively small number of Italians, perhaps only 2,000, were in America at the beginning of the Revolution, these transplanted Italians did actively participate in the coming creation of the new nation. Thomas Jefferson, there was an unlikely relationship. Thomas Jefferson was very tall, red-haired, dressed in very plain clothes, and this dear friend of his, Filippo Mattei, always dressed like a, civilian suits, really beautiful, tailored, the direct opposite, as most Italians of that era. He was a philosopher, a diplomat, a winemaker, a merchant, and an author. And he was a strong supporter of the American Revolution. He really believed that this was the most important thing that they could do, was to gain their independence from Britain. And in 1774, he published a booklet, a speech called, and it was, the lines are almost directly for what Jefferson used in the Declaration of Independence. He said, all men are by nature equally free and independent, and all men are by nature, equality is necessary in order to create a free government. All men must be equal to each other in natural law. That's what this man said to Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson used that in the Declaration of Independence. And this man, in 1779, he accepted a commission from Patrick Henry, who was then the Virginian governor, to seek a loan from the Grand Duke of Tuscany and to gather useful political and military information for Governor Jefferson. He never returned to America. He did go over to try to do that, and he died in Pisa in 1816 without ever returning to America. But after his death, the remainder of the family did return to the United States at the urging of Jefferson, because they were neighbors and he really wanted their family there. But they didn't settle there. They settled mostly in Massachusetts and a little bit in Virginia. So by the Revolutionary War, Italian Americans served both as soldiers and officers in the war. Francesco Vigo aided the colonial forces of George Rogers Clark by serving as one of the foremost financiers of the revolution in the frontier Northwest. Later, he was a co-founder of Vincennes University in Indiana. There's a very sad story about this man. He loaned George Rogers Clark money to be able to carry out the war, his battles, and he was never asked for it back. And he died penniless. Sad story. But he didn't feel like he should ask for it. I guess he thought that they should just give it. But well after his death, the government gave the money back to his family. Along with numerous artisans and artists who came to help build the structures in Washington, D.C. and other cities, in 1852, the Roman-born Costantino Brumidi came to the United States, and what does the Capitol that painting remind you of? Yeah. Well, they wanted Michelangelo, but he said he was responsible for this beautiful painting, including the hypothesis of George Washington and the ceiling of the rotunda, and numerous other.
It's still there today?
Yeah. The capital of the rotunda has not been painted over or anything.
Okay, I'm
When you
glad.
go next, you
I'm
go see it.
glad.
So there is a belief, and there seems to be a good deal of evidence for it, that William Paca of Maryland and Caesar Rodney of Delaware were of Italian heritage. They were both signers of the Declaration of Independence. So the birth of modern Italy, a modern nation state of Italy, was a long process. Giuseppe Garibaldi was one of several men who worked very hard to unify this, to reunify, because it had 1,400 years before, under the Empire of Rome, this peninsula was under one government. It was a unified country, and it was under a unified government. But not since the Roman Empire, and then there was a belief that, and a strong push to reunify these very loose city-states. You know, there was the Duchy of Tuscany, there was the Duchy of Venice, there was, you know, Rome. They did trade with one another, and they all had a common religion pretty much, and but the South, from Naples on down, was under something called the Kingdom of Naples, later called the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. Then the South had been invaded by everybody under the sun, the Arabs, the Normans, you name it. First the Etruscans, the Phoenicians, the Greeks, everybody, and all these people from the South and Sicily had a way of living that was a little bit different. First of all, that was all agrarian. They didn't have any industry there, pretty much, but they did have industry. I mean, Sicily was famous for its lemons, and Calabria and places like that had a lot of agriculture. But as far as you know, a factory that somebody could go to or an office, they didn't exist. And as such, it was really difficult because these people, 80% of them could not read and write. They had been kept down by the landlords who owned their land. They were essentially sharecroppers. They worked the land, and if their benevolent landowner let them keep a little bit of their agriculture that they grew for their families, that was the benevolent gift. My mother's father was one of those people. So the Baron would let him, my grandfather, have a chicken once in a while or have some eggs. But you know, he was the manager of the animals, the animal husbandry. So after 15 years of working for him, my grandfather was given a cow. How wonderful, really? So, yeah, but you got to live on your land, the land that wasn't owned by you, but anytime. So Giuseppe Garibaldi was what you might call a lifetime warrior. It was in his nature to fight, and he had gone, fight for what was just. He had gone all over the world to try to do this. So he decides that he's going to help the Piedmont area, he's going to help the Venetian area, could bring these people from the South into the fold. Did any of you watch the HBO series? I think it was HBO. Might have been Prime, called The Leopolds. Anybody watch it? Yeah? Yeah. So you would have seen that, you know, they didn't want their way of life to go away, but Garibaldi was going to make it happen. And so it took almost 10 years, but the state of Italy, the king, Garibaldi did a very bad thing. He unified Italy and then he gave it to the king. Yep, exactly. So talk about free and independent, didn't happen. So he fought hard to do this, but what happened was the North, most of the people lived in cities. So where are you going to put the taxes so you can keep your cities going? Somebody wasn't supposed to stamp a land, maybe. So the Southerners got taxed for any little thing they had so that they could fund the North, or at least that's how they felt. They were already starving to death. So when Italy was unified, it was a bad state of affair for the South, for the Southern Italians, Naples, Calabria, and Sicily. So at that point in time, while Italy is becoming a one nation, guess what's happening here in America?
Civil War.
Civil War. They're coming together, we're breaking apart. But between 5,000 and 10,000 Italian Americans fought in the Civil War. Garibaldi came and offered his services to the generals, and he put together a regiment for the, I think it was the 46th in New York, of Italians, so they could fight for the Union. But there were some in the South that fought for the Confederacy as well. So they were on both sides of this. But it was interesting to me because the majority of them, it was not the 36th, it was the 39th in New York. But it was very, very sad because so many of these people who were already here joined because they thought that then they would be part of the fabric of the country. But what happened was they were discriminated against anyway, and once the floodgates opened, after unification, most of these people from the South were really starving to death. So if they could scrape together the pennies so that they could buy a ticket in steerage to come to America, they did. And it was, the irony of it was that the explorers who came were from wealthy families and they commanded the ship. Their countrymen came in steerage. And, but they didn't come just to New York and Boston. They came to the port of Louisiana, New Orleans. They went to every part of the country once they landed. So it was a very interesting time because at the same time there was an opening of the Ellis Island. 1894, I think they opened Ellis Island. I could be wrong, but I think so. Anyway, during that period of time, the people that came from Italy, you know, when they processed through, they were asked where they were from. And they didn't say Italy. They said, I'm Napolitana, I'm Calabrese, I'm Sicilian. They were very much ingrained in their regions. They never thought of themselves as a nation because the rest of the nation didn't see them as humans. So it was a tough time for them. So it rained unchecked, and one of the things that is nation should be ashamed of is in 1891, 11 Italians were lynched in New Orleans. They had just been cleared by a jury in a murder trial that they didn't commit. And then there were only 9 on trial, but there were 2 in the jail that were also Sicilian. They took them too, and they lynched them. It was very violent. They had Ku Klux Klan type events that happened, and they came and they didn't come voluntarily, a lot of them. They had recruiters that went to Italy, men that said, we need you. You're a strong boy, young man. There's great work for you in America. Come. Many of them went to farming. Many of them went to the coal mines. Many of them worked on roads. to build railroads and other things. They were recruited. They had these recruiters that came to Italy, and they had a good point. Southern Italy was fertile with men who wanted to work, families who were starving, and there was no work for them. So they came. Some of them, they paid their passage, and then they had to work it off. It happened to a lot of people. It was really, really tough. And these people were frequently attacked for some. First of all, if you were from southern Italy, you had very dark skin. You lived outside. And there is a quote that, I'm sorry I don't have it here, but it's a quote by George Washington Carver, who said that the Italians in America have it worse than the Negroes. That's what he said. And he, it was a bad thing for the Negroes, it was a bad thing for the Italians. People didn't like the way they looked, they called them all kinds of things, they didn't think they were trustworthy, they said they were lazy. And some of the hardest working people, these people built the bridges, the George Washington Bridge, they built the skyscrapers in New York. These people weren't lazy. What called them lazy was that when they first started, the Italians lived in southern Italy, and in the middle of the day, and the people from the south are called the Mezzogiorno, that area, because it means middle of the day. It is excruciatingly hot. So you go and have your lunch and you rest for a couple hours, and then you go back to work. So when they first came, they said, we're just going to eat and go back to work. Don't they know that we should rest a little bit? The sun's too hot. But they followed what was the custom, and they went back to work. So many of them had terrible issues as a result. Many of them died on the job, but they came to do the agricultural work because, we had a civil war that emancipated the enslaved people, and they needed agricultural workers. So many of them came, and the discrimination was so awful that even the Italian government interfered because it was so bad. So despite the sons of Italian Americans signing up voluntarily in droves to go for World War II, more than 600 Italian Americans on the West Coast were restricted, and many of them were just like the Japanese. In fact, they were interned in some of the same camps. And what's very interesting is that I had 4 older sisters, and all 4 of my brother-in-laws served in World War II voluntarily. 3 of their husbands were Italian Americans. They were the sons of immigrants. And just one of them wasn't. He was of Danish extraction. Unfortunately, he lost his life in France. But the other 3, 2 of them served in the Pacific, the Purple Hearts. The Italians were very distinguished in their service, and several of them got medals of honor. So it was really interesting what happened. Now, bless you. Now, we don't think of Fernandina Beach as being a bastion of Italians. Somebody told me earlier, and I don't remember who it was, that they grew up in Akron, Ohio, and there was a huge Italian population. We think of New York, we think of Boston, we think of Akron, Ohio, we think of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, I should say. But there was a group, first man that came was this man. Now, they haven't said his name right here since the beginning of time, since 1902, actually. His name was Salvatore Solito. Now, like most Italians, he put his last name first. And so everybody thought his first name was Solito. But he made it easy. Somebody said to him, "You're Mike." So he became Mike Salvador. And there's a very interesting article that was written about shrimping on Fernandina Beach, and somebody wrote, I read all this stuff they have here, and they said, well, we checked anecdotally with the family, and the name is really spelled Salvador, with no I or E at the end, which isn't correct. But anyway, it doesn't matter. But then there was another man by the name of Salvatore Versace and Antonio Poggi. These two men were Mike, for easier reference here, brother-in-laws. They married his two sisters, and they were from Sicily, and they were fishermen in Sicily. And when they came here, they recognized that there was fish to be had here. And so they did some of the nets that they did in Sicily, and then they just, basically people were fishing here with rowboats, but they decided you needed a motorboat. So they modernized the way that they were fishing for shrimp or any kind of fish. So they motorized the shrimp boats. They did these amazing nets, which they dragged, and they found that the shrimp were Mike Salvador, or Salvatore Solito, did something else. He went to New York, and he sent his brother-in-law too, to find out about the Fulton Fish Market. They had heard about it, and they had to figure out how they could get the fish up there and still keep it fresh, because up until now they were drying the shrimp and canning them. But they figured out how they could do it, pack it in ice, and send it up north and send it to other places. So for a very long time, this was the capital of the shrimping industry in America. But then, it went to St. Augustine, and these same people established shrimp companies there and in South Carolina. They were industrious men, they entrepreneurial, and they figured they could do whatever it took to give people this wonderful fish that everybody loved. So these men essentially put Fernandina on the map, but 1902 is when they came, and yet they too had their problems. Not as much, this community was fairly welcoming of them. And because they were Catholic and the church had already been established here, they were kind of okay. But there were other names that you know. They were joined by Portuguese and Greeks, and you've all heard of Nick Dionis, and his family was the family that built the boats, and you've heard the Burbank family. They made the nets. There are some wonderful families, the Hardys. This shrimping industry was a virtual United Nations. There were locals that had been here forever. There were the Italians, there were the Portuguese, and the Greeks. And they all seemed to thrive. And there's a marker, I think, on 4th Street. There are another family that you know, the name Tringali. That was another one. There were quite a few Italian families here that were involved in the shrimping industry. And so Salvatore Versace was probably one of the most traveled people around. He didn't think anything of it to take a train and go north and explore markets. He was very industrious. So despite all the discrimination that happened, they persevered. In one, maybe 2 generations, then many notable Italians joined the ranks of doctors, lawyers, judges, and the leaders across the nation. Now, something that happened, and some people think this is what happened when they came to Ellis Island or other places. Some of it did, but a lot of the Italians changed their name. They changed their name. They wanted to be, they didn't want to deal with the discrimination. They wanted to be accepted. So if somebody like, very popular, if your name was Vincenzo Marino, and they told you your name was Jimmy, you said, okay, Jimmy's okay. Yeah. And my father was Michelangelo, and they said, Mike. They said, okay, I'm kind, no problem. So they willingly changed their names. They dropped the I's, they dropped the O's. They, just to blend in, they kept their culture and their traditions alive in a very strong way at home. But they wanted to make sure that America would embrace them, and they wanted to embrace America. In that era, you would never find anybody with an Italian heritage who ever went on public assistance. They wanted to work. And they wanted to work, they wanted to own, like when they went to the Northwest Territories or they went out to the middle of the country, they wanted to be shopkeepers, they wanted to own something, they wanted to grow something, they wanted to make something. Many of them became the carpenters, the electricians, and the plumbers that built America, basically. And you found them on, if you've ever seen, there's a very iconic picture of these workers on a skyscraper. They're on a, you know which one I mean? Yeah. They were all Italians. And I used to get scared just looking at the picture. But they were very brave. They fought. They did what they needed to do. And so, let me segue into thank you for the shoes. Oh, I was talking about people making it. This was Governor Andrew Longino. He was the governor of, first a judge, a lawyer, and then the governor of Mississippi. So, and he kept his Italian name, I-N-O. He did not get rid of it. Now, I wrote a book called Thank You for the Shoes. How many of you went to see or watched on a streaming service the Titanic? You all knew what was going to happen, right? But what made that movie so memorable was Rose and Jack. You could relate. This is the story of one man's journey. It was actually a boy, 13 years old, who came to America. The boy was my father. This is a story his father came when he was a baby for a second trip, and he couldn't bring the family because they had a son with a congenital heart problem, and at Ellis Island they turned back anybody who had any deformity or defect or any health defect at all. So his father died here, building railroad bed where they were blasting, and he had some heart trouble and he had a heart attack and died. So he never knew his father. Then his mother married out of necessity, and the stepfather was less than a kind man, so he went to live on his own at the age of 10. And then at the age of 13, he came to America, and he had done his homework. So this story is an everyman story. It exemplifies and brings to life all of what I just told you, because he was from a mountain town in southern Italy. And it was very interesting. We have that same situation here. The people that live in the valley were revered as being more cultured, this and that. Yet here in America, the same way. We call them hillbillies. And in Italy, you would call them a montagnaro because they were from the mountains. And he was from the mountains. And if you wanted to sell the few little things you had grown, you had to walk down the mountain to go to the marketplace, which was in the valley, and then you had to walk back up every day. That's how he did it. And so he came to America by himself, and it's a story of grit, determination, and a triumph of spirit. Lots of pain, but lots of happiness and hope as well. So I hope you'll enjoy my story if you haven't already, but it's what my attempt to bring the Titanic to life through a real person's eyes. Thank you so much for Any questions? Any comments?
Well done.
Not that kind of comment. But I think you really
nowhere without immigrants. We would be nowhere.
Absolutely. So this is what this comes in. And in America, we processed millions, 4 million Italians came through from 1880 to 1924. And then it curtailed because of the immigration laws, and it was very difficult after that. But during that period, people came through Ellis Island, and you know, you have weepy eyes. You go there. You look good. You have to answer all these questions. The way my father got through it, he had had meningitis, and he knew his eyes weren't good. He sold his postage stamp property and the house, and there's a picture of it in the book. You and I would call it a hut, a stone hut. He sold that so he could buy a second-class ticket. Because when he asked the questions, they said, second class, if you don't look crazy and you aren't visibly impaired, you don't go through Ellis Island. So he didn't go through Ellis Island. But he was 13. He was 13 by himself. It's a circuitous route of a story. He came, and he was very smart. He was very entrepreneurial. He endured a lot of tragedy, but it never kept him down. He was always uplifted, smiling at everyone. He had a very hard life. But
What did he do here?
what did he do here? When he first came, he worked in the coal mines. That's where they sent him.
What
He wasn't-
state?
West Virginia.
He landed in New York, and then these people at the docks there, he told them he was looking for Bridgeport, and they said, well, if you get on the train, we'll take you to Bridgeport. Turns out it's Pennsylvania, not Connecticut. And he was too young. When he went to Pennsylvania, they were just starting to crack down on children being in these dangerous jobs. And they were afraid, so they took him, but then they said, you can't work in there. So they sent him to a steel mill to clean latrines. And then when he was a little older, they sent him back to the coal mine, and he was a breaker boy. If you have never been near a breaker machine, oh my God, it is the scariest thing. And these young people would bend over and have to separate the coal. And he did that for a good bit of time, but he said, that's not why I left Italy, not to be here. So anyway, then he went to work somewhere else, and it was one job after another. He listened. The thing that he taught all of us, we're a total of 10 children, was always look people in the eye when you're talking to them, always be honest, and know your banker. So, as a young child, my father would take me. He would go to the Norwalk Savings Society, and he would bring me, and I didn't even, I was too shy to even look at anybody, and he'd say, look up, you gotta look up. And Mrs. Raymond, who was the bank manager, she would talk to me, and I'm thinking, why is she talking to me? She said, do you like school? I said, yes, I like school. Anyway, but then I overheard a conversation, and she said to my father, thank you, Mr. Rizzo, you brought us all kinds of good business, because my father would tell other Italians, they treat you good there. And if my father heard you were a good worker, he would tell Mrs. Raymond, you give him a mortgage. He's a good family man, he goes to work every day. And that was what the credit was based on. You know, they didn't have computers to check anything. If it was word of mouth. But later on, he became a house painter.
So Marie, the Matsai family still is in business. Barbara and I were there last year. They started their business in Tuscany in 1435.
Right. Yeah.
And they do make a wine on the label, Thomas Jefferson.
Oh wow, how wonderful! I didn't even know that.
I've seen that at Charlie's at East 48th Street Market
Oh wow.
in Atlanta.
Yeah, I never noticed that. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's amazing, isn't it? All these years later. Any other comments, questions?
Thank you.
Oh, everybody, before you leave, please remember we do have our exhibit opening happening now for challenges and transformations, and it'll be downstairs.
Cross the ball safe.